Yes.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I love the virtual background you have there.
Yeah, thanks. I thought I self-promote a bit.
Yeah, it's okay.
So how is life?
Life is good. Um, there's a lot of articles that I'm writing. I was just spending the whole morning just writing stuff for elite game developers, so it's keeping me busy. It's
yeah,
fun.
yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have been busy preparing for the Steam summer festival since that starts next week. So exciting times. People get to play, like general public gets to play our game for the first time. So
can you talk about that festival? What is the festival? Because I'm not actually familiar that much with.
Truth be told, I'm not entirely sure if it's a coronavirus kind of thing or has that taken place earlier as well. I'm not that deep into it, but it's basically Valve's or Steam's kind of Steam-based festival where all sorts of new games they will be streamed. Many of them have demos. I don't think the demos are compulsory, but I think most will have demos available. So people get to see, and then of course they are promoted as well. So kind of like an extra push, particularly as for the game is coming out in summer. So Gamescom, which would have of course been the biggest push for us, then that's a digital one now. So have to take all the chances there is to promote the game. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was super happy with the Nordic game. I really think it worked really well. I wasn't expecting that it would be that many people watching the videos and everything. So
for me, this was first time maybe in even 10 years or something that I wasn't in Nordic game. Mostly because there was the European EGDF or A. I don't remember. Difficult. European Game Developers Festival or something like that, just 1 week earlier, and we were there promoting our new games. So that what kind of was priority, and then we weren't at all in Nordic games. So
yeah, but you don't need to fly anywhere, so that's always good.
Yeah, that's true. And the prices aren't at least the online festivals or events have been quite cheap as well. So it's not as a big time or money investment.
It is. It's like you're saving so much, and you can do it from home even. Like
yeah, and at least with the online event that we participated, it was good because if you didn't have that interesting meetings, then you could just go back to regular work. Instead of if you're at a different part of the globe, then it's more difficult. And at least I'm usually maybe I'll check the emails, but I normally don't go back to whatever I was doing back at home. So
yeah, that's a good point. Man, should we get going? I want you to first talk about Resistance Games and your background a bit. So I'll give you the rights to share the screen here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you have rights.
Okay. So I hope this works.
Yeah. It works.
I've done this once before, so now you probably see the wrong one. So if I switch, is it now on full screen?
No, now it is.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I hope everyone has found this webinar who wanted to find. So I'm Jussi Autio from Resistance Games. Few words first about myself. I consider myself as a kind of business-oriented designer. I've been in the business for 14 years. I have strong entrepreneur background. I've founded 4 companies, and I've been the CEO 3 times. Not this time though. And I've also been a designer for game companies. But on top of this, I've also been in Joachim's business doing a bit of consulting or business coaching. I've helped with my own hands 15 game companies get established that I didn't become part of. So more as a consultant or business coach. And currently I'm the creative director in Resistance Games, and we make PC strategy games, but I'll talk a bit more about Resistance Games in just 1 second. But I am also advisor in a couple of game companies. So one in Turku and one in Tampere. So still helping others as well. And Resistance Games, we are relatively young, but experienced studio. So we make premium PC strategy games. We are located in northern Finland, so in Oulu, so not in the capital area. And I do dare say that we have kind of a dream team startup. The founding team of 8 people has 15 years of experience on average. So only with the new recruits, I'm slightly more experienced than the average one. But within the founding team, I'm 1 year less experienced than the average one. So yeah, we've been growing to 13 people. We are finalizing our first game, The Company of Crime, which I'm shamelessly self-promoting with my background as well. It will be playable next week, and it will be out towards the end of the summer. The release date will be announced quite soon as well. And this indeed is our first game. And we have runway till the end of the year. We have 2 letter of intents with publishers, one in particular, like one very close to signing already. And if that would take place, I'm super pleased that would be my 3rd game in a row that we didn't have to make any demos, but rather just with the game design we could sign a game. But I hope I now didn't jinx it, because it looks very good, and hopefully within a month we would have signed the next deal. But let's see. But yeah, that's briefly us. I think the main point is to help whoever is listening today. So shall we switch to that then, or?
Yes. Yeah. I like the topic of today is like how you got into creating this spreadsheet that we've been sharing since yesterday on the blog at the Elite Game Developers. I'll quickly show a few slides here, and then we go into discussing that spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share mine now. Can you see it?
Yes.
All right. Just go back to the beginning. So this is the spreadsheet that Jussi created. We talked a few weeks ago about, hey, there's more help to be done on the PC premium game developer side. And so far, I've been spending so much time on mobile topics that relate more to mobile. That Jussi brought up this idea that we could basically create a template where his knowledge on how PC premium game sales could be projected through certain kind of understanding could be done. First, a few words about myself. So today's topic was the premium PC game sales. Introduction myself, I'm founder, Joakim Akkernen, the founder and CEO of Elite Game Developers, which I started last year. It's basically an online game startup school where I try to create as much content as possible to help out people who are starting their own games company, be it an indie developer or somebody who's going immediately through the venture capital route of raising a lot of money from investors, if they can do that immediately. So, and there's a lot of things in between that. There's kind of like a long tail of game developers out there who I believe need a lot of help so that they wouldn't struggle as I did. My first games company, which I founded in 2005, Iron Star Helsinki, I needed to learn everything the hard way. Many times the company almost died, and it eventually did after 6 years. of hard work. but
we have very similar in this sense. I started my first in 2006, and it survived 6 years, and it was close to death several times. And I also had to learn most of the stuff. There was a lot of help from Ludocraft guys and their organized Elvi project, but that was at the very beginning. So after that, all the mistakes had to be done myself. But yeah, sorry. Sorry for the interruption.
Thanks for adding that. I think there's a lot of these similar kind of stories. And I believe it doesn't need to be always that way, that people need to suffer before they get to the point where they at least can pay salaries to themselves. I think that is the first step where I want people to get into, that they can make enough money from what they create, their games, to pay a salary for themselves and their team, and then go from there wherever they want. But like after that experience, I went to Supercell for a bit over a year, and seeing the success there, I decided I want to do another company. I started Next Games with 3 other co-founders in 2013, and that was interesting ride. Definitely all the lessons learned previously could be applied, and new lessons constantly being learned as you kind of go back past the early stage of few guys in a room, like where I was in my first company. I didn't really move past that stage. So there's constantly learnings. And now I started Elite Game Developers last year to start helping the entrepreneurs who are at this stage. Like I mentioned, that I have the podcast, which I started last year. There's about 70 episodes almost available now. And I really want to ask from all the entrepreneurs, how are they tackling these early stages where they don't know anything? And I think one of the best lessons that I've learned from other entrepreneurs now is that ask people for advice and help. Ask other games companies. Don't stay in your own kind of like room and think about like what's going on and try to figure out stuff by Googling it. Just ask directly from other game developers. That helps so much. But hey, let's go into the topic today. This is the URL where you can get the template. It's elitegamedevelopers.com/PCGame. We're going to share this recording later on YouTube and also on the blog, so you won't miss a thing if you need to leave early, or if you're just joining, you will see what we talked about already. So Jussi, I have a lot of questions for you. Let's go through these, probably like 20 minutes, and then we're going to have time for getting some questions from the audience on the webinar. First question. So in what kind of situations will this spreadsheet become handy? What is your thoughts there?
I think it can be used in several situations. First of all, at least we use this spreadsheet already when someone has a new concept that we would start pitching for publishers or investors. Then is it really a good idea or not? What is the sales potential for the game? So then before we start putting any extra hours on any of our game concepts, we put it on this spreadsheet to see that would it make sense, and also what production values would make sense, that how big budget would still make the case feasible. And then of course for publishers, we don't, at the early stage, we don't show this. Sometimes we do show this. This is to prove that yes, we also think money and we want to make profit with our games. So we do sometimes share it to the publishers as well, and that's actually why I feel that this is quite good spreadsheet, because we've gotten from feedback from the publishers as well, even the ones that we haven't worked together earlier, but then they see that how do we calculate stuff, and that also makes me confident. So then this is our way to show that what do we feel that the sales potential for this game is. And last but not least, of course, the investors. If you are looking for investors, they would want more than just ideas. They would want kind of have belief that you actually know what you're getting into, and that your estimations are actually based on something and not just the guesswork. So this is where we also use it, that whenever we show our investor deck, all the figures based on something. There is zero kind of well, we feel like this could be it, but it's rather that we build scenarios. Like, when is a good time to become self-publishing? Well, with this spreadsheet, we can do scenarios and estimate that at which stage is a good way to start doing publishing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from the kind of life cycle, each part, and actually, of course, the key element with the pitching of new ideas, like internal pitches, that is my idea or your idea, great. It's not just if that the game concept is great, but how easily it could be expanded. So this shows quite easily that if you put very high DLCs, like downloadable contents or expansion costs, then maybe it doesn't become that sensible to that in case the game is a success, can you easily expand it? Or would it be like always only a sequel after the initial game? So that also like allows us to ponder that which concept should we focus next and which we shouldn't focus next.
Right. Following question. So there's some scenarios that you've created into the spreadsheet where you're looking at like the top games, lower games. How should people look at these scenarios so that they're not fooling themselves perhaps or creating unrealistic expectations?
Yeah, exactly. Well, first of all, every new team should look in the mirror, try to be as honest with themselves as possible, that how good is your team, and also look at the different publishers, that how good is your publisher if you're not doing self-publishing. So for a hobbyist, maybe being better than half of the game developers out there or half of the games in the genre, that could be a good thing. But we both know that if you only reach median sales, you're bankrupt in any case. So the median should be like a catastrophe scenario for most of us, that half of the games do better than ours and half do worse than ours. So that should always be a catastrophe scenario. But of course, even small teams can make a big break. So the scenarios bit in this spreadsheet is that you could estimate that, okay, well, we're maybe a young team or we're a small team, we're fighting against AAA or whatnot. So changing the probability percentage for different scenarios, that do we make the top hit game? Is it a 1% chance or is it 10% chance? That also goes together, of course, with the how confident you are with your game idea. And this is where the developers need to be brutally honest, because already production values, meaning do you have cinematics and how big marketing budget do you have? So if your case only makes sense if you're within top 1% of the games, in most cases, well, it's super difficult to get into the top 1%. But then, it's still a possibility. So you can estimate the probability for that, and then you can, as long as you add all the different scenarios, then you get the expected value, that how much, if you made this game 1,000 times, how much would you expect to get on average from this game?
Do you have any kind of like let's say you have a very unexperienced indie developer who would look at the spreadsheet and look at the scenarios. Is there if you can like put it into short format, what would be the advice there? How can they understand what is a good expectation, what is not realistic?
Well, one thing is that if you're a young developer, the EDAR, the market research company, has proved already several years ago that sadly marketing is more important than good game. If you can have good marketing or good game, which impacts the sales more, sadly it's the marketing. Right. So if you only have developers within your team, then most likely your sales scenarios are going to be very, very bad. So don't put in don't fool yourself to believe that we are going to make million sales if we don't have anyone actually promoting the game.
Right.
So also, actually, one more thing: this probabilities actually help also dictating which publisher would be perfect for you. Like if you have, like most teams will struggle to get AAA publishers, but if you have indie publisher who offers you a better deal and medium-sized publisher who offers you a worse deal, but it's still bigger, then you could change the percentages to see that, which one will more likely provide you with more money, getting 30% of the revenue or getting 70%, but then the partner is better or worse.
Right, got it.
So my suggestion still for the kind of building these scenarios is that if it's a great game, most likely you shouldn't struggle to get into top 20% of the sales, maybe top 15. But then the better publisher you have, more you could increase the higher steps. If you indeed intend to do self-publishing, please adjust them clearly to the lower end, because you don't have the contacts yet, or most likely the young team doesn't have the contacts. They don't know how to get influencers on board, which journalist likes to report on this type of games. So then it's just realistic that you adjust the probabilities down.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question: how would you go about estimating the number of copies sold for the base game? Like, if let's say that a developer is working on a title that like you guys, for instance, how would you put it? Like, is it in the top or the next like bracket? Like, when you know that you're not, you might have a really good game in your hands, but like, where is the accuracy there? Or do you more or less just say that, hey, it cannot at least go below this line, and this is like where we are still like making profit, and we know that we're going to be higher than that? Or what is your take on that side?
Yeah, that's exactly what I love about the spreadsheet the most, is that you can have both sides of that coin. So you can dream on that maybe our game is the top seller. In the default settings, that the best scenario is your best top 5 sales game. Feel free to add the top 1 there as well. Yeah. But then you just adjust the probabilities, and then you do get the expected value out of it. And those who aren't familiar with mathematical terms, expected value is that if indeed your probabilities, if you throw dice, regular D6 dice, the expected value is 3.5, because if you throw it a million times, on average, the result is 3.5. Yes, it can't be 3.5, because 3 or 4 is you can only have 3 or 4, but the expected value is 3.5. So if you bet that out of 10 throws, how many points do you get? We'll multiply them together. You can have stupid bets and you can have wise bets. And with dice, if you bet like 10 throws, I bet 35 will be the outcome. That is the most probable outcome for dice, where each are as probable, like everyone has 1/6 probability. So in this sense, the spreadsheet, you have to have access to Steam Spy. And Steam Spy is, earlier it was very accurate before GDPR. So it goes through the usernames, checks who has certain game, calculates and shows how many games do you have. But with the GDPR, they can't store individual data anymore. So now what they are now doing is same way as polls are being done, that if there is elections, there's always what's the support there with the margin of error. So for them, the margin of error is similar to the kind of voting systems based on the blog post that they've written. But with small sales, this is as direct quote as I remember. If the game in Steam Spy has less than 30,000 copies shown, the error margin is higher. Then, even if it's like a percentage error margin, then the gap will be so big that you shouldn't take those small numbers so seriously. But anything above 30,000 should be like good enough for making estimations.
Good. On to the next one. So looking at you specified there in the spreadsheet the publisher developer contracts, and looking at the 50-50 split that you've created there, is that an industry standard nowadays?
Well, that's difficult to say because I only have no knowledge of my deals that I've made, and of course the deals of my where I'm advisor, and some talks with other colleagues. My feel is that if you are in the AAA games, the contract you're going to get is a lot worse because the risk for publisher is going to be millions and millions. But for the medium-sized deals or publishers, I think 50-50 is pretty standard. It could be that if you're not bringing any money in, maybe then you will have to settle with 30% or like 70-30. And if you come up with almost ready game, then you could get 70 yourself and the publisher could get settle with 30. But 50-50 is kind of like in the middle. At least I consider that the 50-50 deal is a pretty good standard deal. Nothing exceptionally good, but nothing exceptionally bad either. So,
right, got it.
And the big difference, of course, is the recouping. I think it's impossible to get, at least for me, it has been impossible to get the recoups out. Recoup means that before you start getting revenue, the publisher wants to get back whatever they put in it. It is possible that you would get, let's say, 30% first, and once the publisher has recouped whatever they put into your game, then it starts being 50-50. But that's kind of a very crucial point in negotiating deals there. How does the recoup go?
Right.
But I don't have any experience on AAA, but from what I've heard from the big boys, switch my screen accidentally, then I think they mostly have worse deals than 50-50.
Yeah, it really depends on the risk, who is taking risk and how much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of questions going into the chat, so if the audience, we will have time for questions, so look up the Q&A in the bar there in Zoom and type your questions in there, so we're going to find them in there at the end. And the next question here that I prepared is the R&D payments. So what are the tips that you would give for developers on negotiating those? Are there certain payments that are very industry standard? Is there a certain area where developers could think about negotiating more payments?
It's a bit difficult question to answer. I think that everything, even before you start selling anything, you should figure out how does the game work, how much does it cost to make this game, and then indeed request that with this money we can make it. Everyone knows that deals, particularly if it's long development time, it's difficult to estimate all the costs. So there should be like a room that you make mistakes. You don't get everything right for the first time. But what I have witnessed is that whatever you are asking from the publisher, they should be based on, hopefully you have some sort of milestone in mind already, even though like an accurate milestone for a 2-year project is very, very difficult to make. But publishers never try to bargain your costs down because they have only stuff to lose. Let's say that I'm asking you for 1 million euros. And you're like, oh, well, I really like this game, but can you make it with 500,000? And I would say yes. And then we run out of money. Well, who is it to blame? Well, for us, for settling with something that we can't deliver, but it would be just as much your fault as a publisher because you didn't give what the developers were asking. So I extremely rarely see any bargains on whatever you're asking. It's rather that if you're asking too much, they will say that yes, our deals are usually within this scope. So sadly, this is too much what you ask, and end of discussion. Sometimes, yes, that can we drop some elements. So then you should be prepared that, okay, maybe we drop this bit or maybe we do this as a DLC or something like that. Well, it's super rare that the publisher would bargain your budget down because it will only make themselves look stupid.
Yeah, that's good. Next thing, can you talk about the extra costs that you had there in the green section?
Yeah, particularly if you're talking with small to medium sized, so not indie publishers, but anything a bit above that. I think it's quite common that the publisher will pay for the trailer. Publisher will pay for the final QA that will make sure that you find all the bugs in the game that it works on. If it's a PlayStation game, that it goes through PlayStation's certificates and so forth. Localization costs are usually also included in this. So it's all that extra costs that someone else is doing. So not the publisher themselves. Rarely or maybe the AAA publishers have internal trailer makers, but most that I work with, they go for then trailer studios that just do trailers, and then they pay them, and then they want to recoup that back as well.
Right, got it.
The worst thing, I've never been offered this, but I've heard stories that some publishers do offer that they would include some of their own staff members' salaries in this. That should be a no-go. Definitely not. If they are to earn money on your game, they should be working together with you and not recoup their own salaries. Only whatever they pay outside. So yeah. I would never accept a deal that publisher puts their own salaries in there as a recoupable extra costs.
That's great. So basically, like whether they're spending outside of their own work.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what recoups. Yeah, makes sense. Then DLCs and the numbers that you have there in the spreadsheet, especially the attach rate. Can you expand a bit on where the hypothesis for the percentage?
Yeah, this is something that I don't have first-hand experience, and this is when I started thinking that maybe I should share this because many of the publishers have been super helpful. I did have the kind of similar attach rate earlier, but since I don't have any first-rate experience, that how many copies, how many players who bought the base game, what would be the average one to use? So this is actually something that I've gotten a lot of help from publishers. I want to specifically mention Iceberg Studios on this one because they helped a lot, but it has been verified with a couple of others as well. So the average, there are games that are whose fans are super enthusiastic, and maybe even half of the players would buy also some DLCs. Yeah. And then if the game sucks, but you still make DLCs to it, then maybe 20% only buys DLCs. And the 35% that is the default setting in the spreadsheet, that's what I've been told by a couple of publishers that's kind of like the standard average case that how many people would be happy to buy DLCs. The other one, the attach rate from the next DLC, that's a difficult one to do because not always the first DLC is the best-selling DLC. But in order not to create the like forever loop that the money comes in indefinitely, because then the spreadsheet estimates that always the next one is a bit worse. So 90% would buy, those who bought the DLC, 90% would buy the next DLC, and then the next would again 90%. So it's kind of like it will create a long tail, but always diminishing sales for the DLCs, which is probably the most difficult thing to estimate in this kind of forecasts, that because some DLCs make more sense than others, but
yeah. Do you have any kind of advice there regarding how to evaluate a concept for DLC and then take that into the Excel and prove it through that? Like, is there any way of doing that? Is it more about like what makes sense for the game from the design?
I think like you should start always what makes sense for the game, but indeed in the initial game concept creation stage, before you have a demo, before you have a pitch deck, I think you can already see that is this DLC friendly game or not. Like, sadly, for Company of Crime, we would have only one DLC in mind that's cheap to do, but then it would be very, very art heavy. So the DLCs would be super expensive to do. So Company of Crime isn't really DLC friendly. But the other games that we're selling, then those we have bared in mind that how expensive would it be to expand this experience. And my personal opinion on DLCs is that like outside AAA, more in the medium-sized games, if you bring extra content, extra playable faction or extra missions, those usually aren't really, they are expensive to make if you need to do a lot of art, but they aren't necessarily the stuff that people are happy to pay a lot of extra. But if you bring extra gameplay, so coders work a lot, but not so much extra content, so not extra art and so forth, that means that the content you already had earlier becomes more replayable. It kind of changes that, and that's what people are more happy, that now it's an excuse to play once again for the 10th or 100th time. The base experience changes because there is new gameplay in it. So my encouragement is to bring more gameplay focused DLCs than content focused ones.
Good, that's great. So now the audience has the floor. Let's give it up for the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing so we can look at our faces a bit here. Pause here, shops. All right. Okay, first question here. I would be curious to see how the PC spreadsheet is different to a free-to-play mobile game. What are the key differences? Finally, how do you come to your assumptions that are the drivers to the final numbers?
Well, I think, Joachim, you're a better expert on free-to-play than I am. But I mean, with the free-to-play, you have the clear funnel thing that not just in the raising awareness and then finally getting a download and then getting someone to pay. For premium games, the funnel is, yes, there that people need to know about your game, but when they buy the game, you've already made money. So there is no, you're not giving the game for free. So that, like a download is so much easier to get than a sale. So I think this alone changes everything dramatically. That if you're estimating how many downloads, yes, you can get from the analytics how much money average user is getting, and then you can estimate how much you can use for the user acquisition. But you can't do that in premium games because we don't get as accurate data out of it. Like, how did my sales campaign go? I can see that, yes, people bought the game because they now knew about it, but maybe it wasn't that YouTube campaign that I did or the new trailer or whatnot. So it's very, very, very different.
Yeah.
And then how from where to get the assumption? Yes, from Steam Spy. That's the key place. And indeed, in higher numbers, it's still the best source we have. If you're looking for estimations below 30,000 copies sold, then the Steam Spy themselves says that those aren't really that accurate, so they wouldn't be. But then again, building these scenarios, if you sell 30,000 copies, most cases you're bankrupt in any case. Yeah. So in this sense, it doesn't matter that much. So those small numbers.
Yeah, I'll add to that I think the mobile free-to-play user acquisition is the biggest difference to PC Steam games, because they are free games and you start playing and then you monetize later. But then the main similarities come from engagement, I think, because you can start looking at like some interesting metrics on engagement side in both platforms regarding updates. So the DLC is basically an update, and you want to know what are the players engaging with. I think you can use metrics, you can use player like user generated content on YouTube to look at what is engaging, what isn't. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities when it comes to understanding the long tail of the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, another question here. Can you elaborate more on the assumptions for assessing the probability of the numbers of copies sold? And I think here's a really good distinction question here is, do you look at similar games with key mechanics, and how do you determine the closest competitors?
Yes, this is an extremely good question. I forgot the beginning part of the question. It was a long question, but for us at least, the key element is that when we know that this is a grand strategy game, or this is a 4X strategy game, or this is a turn-based tactics game, someone might be making visual novel or whatnot, then you can see what are the top games in that subgenre. And then you should have separate from this spreadsheet, what are your unique selling points? What is the experience that your game provides that even the market leader doesn't provide? Why is your game better than the market leader? And my personal opinion is that if you can't answer this, then you shouldn't make that game. You need to make the best game for a certain audience always. And if you can't find that angle, it doesn't have to be like absolute, that every single aspect of the game will be better. That would be super expensive and super difficult. But from certain angle, it needs to be the best game for someone out there. And then you can estimate that, okay, well, does it really fix something major while still providing cool experiences for the player? And then that helps you making those estimations that how well do you do. When we approach publishers, we always have separate USP lists that we describe. Sometimes if there is a clear market leader that we do the things differently, or if the genre is established like 4X games, they have the most annoying end war always. Do we fix that somehow? Then that is that even the end game is actually fun, which is almost always super boring, huge micromanagement. Then that's clearly one unique selling point that the publisher or yourself could then use to sell the game for the players. So
yeah,
we sometimes do, if there is a clear market leader, sometimes do like a comparative analysis that this game does this way, well, we do it this way. They do it, this element this way, we do it this way. And then hopefully some of them are just that, yes, sometimes it's different, but hopefully most of them mean that, well, ours is clearly better somehow. So
that's a really good answer, Jussi. Yeah. I think the same applies for mobile as well, that you're looking at like, the differentiation from the competition is always the biggest.
I think key is indeed differentiation. Yes.
Yeah. The next question, how do you avoid bad publishing deals where somebody's trying to just swindle you?
Well, ask from, if you know someone who has made a deal with them before, ask. I think at least in Finland, I've been puzzled why some like long-term veterans from the 90s. Yes, it was very different back then, and then developers didn't have much options, so the publishing deals were really bad. But well, I entered the scene as a student 2005, and next year as a professional, and it's very rare that the publishers would try to screw you over. Yes, I've heard several stories that there are still publishers that do screw you over, but if you ask around network and then ask how did you feel like working with the publisher, and people usually are happy to tell. At least, even if they don't go into details, they will let you know what to be wary of.
Good, that's good. Another question here: creating hype in upcoming section of Steam and utilizing momentum. What are your thoughts there?
Well, yes, that's what we all would want to create, as much hype as possible. Well, for premium games, trailers are one thing. Hopefully you do several trailers, maybe CGI and then gameplay trailer. If you have cool stuff in your game, bring them out. Don't be like, oh, but this would spoil our story. Who cares? If that's like the coolest stuff you have in your game, then spoil it. It's like, I don't know. Like, I think the main thing with why we still feel, I have done in my earlier career self-publishing as well, and I know that's a lot of work, and you need to have dedicated people for it. So our 13 people, 12 are making the game. So that's why I prefer working with publishers when we're still relatively small, because they also can have fresh look. They probably have better understanding of the target audience, what appeals to them, what kind of stuff would be particularly cool. Not always because you know your game the best and you know what will be the coolest features in the game. So not always, but usually they know that what appeals. Like when to use that, hey, this has 80 handcrafted levels, and when not to use, because that at certain places that might mean something, and certain places it doesn't mean anything. So I don't know if I answered that very well, but yeah, creating a hype, that's very important. That's also why I would encourage everyone to create a DLC plans for your games and design your games so that you can expand them. Because if you have DLCs then coming out, it will never be as big news as your game launching, but it will create small spikes of publicity, help bring people back, remind those that had wishlist your game, but have forgotten about it. Maybe some of them will now buy it since they see that, yes, our game is still supported. There is new stuff coming, because many games are abandoned, particularly if the sales doesn't peak immediately. Usually developers can't afford to stick to that game. They have to be working on the next game. So if with the DLCs you show that, well, this game, we still care about this, there's still more stuff coming. So for certain players, you know, they know that also means that they have balanced the game better. It's a guarantee that this is already really cool, on really cool quality level, since they're already bringing also DLCs to it. So
yeah, good answer, man. Another question here: how may the 50-50 share with publishers change with some kind of exclusivity deals, you know, with the platform owners? Do you have thoughts there?
I don't think it has to change at all, but this is something that I haven't made an exclusivity deal with Epic, or I don't think does Valve even do exclusivity deals. But it's between you and publisher. So if publishers think it's wise to go on exclusive deal with the Epic Store for a certain amount of time, well, the 50-50 deal is between the two of you. And if you're using Unreal Engine, they take their money at the same place as Steam does or Epic Store does. So that the 50-50 is after their cut. But of course, great news with the Unreal is that they start charging their portion only after first €1,000,000. So that the spreadsheet doesn't yet take into account. I will update it later that it would take this into account, because I think a couple of months ago the Epic announced that they give up their revenue share from the first €1,000,000 or dollars, I think.
Yeah.
$3.
Here's a really good question. Like, what is the basis for the base game pricing? Like in the spreadsheet, it's $40 now. But how do you base that?
Yes, that is like that's also what I always say to the publishers, that you are probably better judge for this. But of course, that is your production values. If you're making a game with €500,000, you're not gonna charge €40 for it. The production qualities cannot be that high. If you're making a game with €3,000,000, then probably €40 is a good price, maybe even 50 sometimes. But the publishers usually have an opinion. They do often want to hear your take on it, but that has most to do with the like production quality. How good your art is. Do you have CGI and like cinematics there and so forth? Not necessarily even so much how replayable the game is or how much content there is, but rather the production values. So the €40 is quite a lot. €30, €20. If you go below €20, then then it has to be clearly in the game that I would be wary of putting too much less than €20 the price though. But
good answer. When do you believe the overall focus of video game startups would be moving away from the free-to-play mobile market? Not sure about this moving away.
yeah, the moving away is a bit that's a loaded question, clearly. I actually studied history as my major, and I have 11-hour history of games lecture series in Udemy. Whenever there is a new like device coming out that brings tons and tons of players, it's always that the investors move to that, because that's not yet so crowded. That's where people are just getting used to. Also, the games become casual, whether it's in the 80s or 90s or 2000s, always with a new platform that brings lots of new players, it first turns casual. And then when people get more used to it, then the mid-core starts to be there. Never the hardcore is never mainstream, but the hardcore is always there still. But kind of where do you get the highest production values? That dictates like where is the new players coming, and thus new opening markets. One thing that I feel that us as developers shouldn't get too distracted is that what the media writes about, because media writes about change. So the mobile free-to-play market is still, well, actually, it is shrinking in the sense that 2016 was the highest year when most mobile games came out, and it's now only 1/4 the number of new games coming out every day. So it is already smoldering. The business is still booming and so forth, but people have realized, or developers have realized, it's very, 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 very difficult to be successful there. So my answer is that don't worry too much about what the media writes, because apart from the handheld consoles, that's probably the only one that completely disappeared. Well, yeah, Flash games disappeared. Flash game business also disappeared. But usually the old business stays around, and it's still like feasible, particularly if most developers move away, then well, it's more better business if there is less competition. So then making the good old games could still make sense. But now with the shrink in number of mobile games, I'm a bit worried, because the number of PC games have started to climb, and that means that it's going to be more and more difficult for PC developers. Thus, my encouragement would be, I'm not a console gamer, but my encouragement would be to go consoles, because those are closed platforms. It's difficult to get there, which means, well, a single game gets more attention from the player. So probably a company-wise, it would make sense to make console games.
Yeah, that's an excellent point too. Where people aren't focusing, you can find opportunities.
Yeah, it's exactly, yeah.
Next question: how do you describe the type of game you are making? Is there a balance between being too vague and too specific when looking at the market?
Well, this goes into kind of how do you describe, this goes a bit away from the spreadsheet, because in the spreadsheet, you need to find the genre that you're in if you want to make estimations. And there I would go as specific as possible, but so that it's an actual genre that the games are tagged as. So don't go atmospheric music games. Well, no, that is like not all games that have atmospheric music. It might be a tag that you can sort how well they sell, but not all games with atmospheric music are there. So go for the kind of subgenres: 4X, visual novel, grand strategy, action RPG, and so forth. So there, for the estimations point of view, select the best fitting genre that has your competitors in it, that the closest competitors. But then, of course, when the pitching part, when you approach for the publishers, my encouragement is to be as specific as possible. Show that you have designed, lower the sense of risk of the publisher. If you just throw ideas, my belief is that no one buys your game. No one will give you money unless you're a Supercell hero that has made it already several times. Then you might be successful even with vague ideas. But if you're a mortal developer like I am, then show that this game has been designed. We know how this will work, because then it's a matter of, do they believe this game would be great? And then they have easier time believing also that, yes, this budget that we're asking, we have done the math, we know we can make it with this money. Because if the publisher gets that, yeah, the idea sounded vague and they had a price number for it, how can they buy something if they believe that the pitch was vague and the price was quite high? Then that sounds risks all over, unless you're a hero studio that has proven themselves several times. So,
good point. Another question here. We'll still take a few here. What do you think is a good, adequate size of a publisher's marketing budget in proportion to the overall project cost? And a follow-up question to this: is there a way to see if the publisher is trying to save money from marketing to undermine the sale?
Tough question. That's a difficult thing because, of course, the marketing budget, for a large part, that's work. So that's also something that shouldn't be in that spreadsheet. The work what their own PR guys does. When they contact media, when they send out press releases, when they talk to influencers, that should not be anything that they recoup. So you don't see the total cost as a developer, not quite often. So it's rather just the kind of how good quality the trailer is and so forth. So that's a very tricky question. And particularly as the marketing budget usually is, well, sometimes it's mentioned separately, but the recoupable things often list other costs as well. So maybe I'll pass on this, but it needs to be a considerable amount. And of course, the bigger the production, usually soon the marketing is same or even bigger as the development cost. But on smaller games, I don't think it's that high. But then again, the staff members of publishers, you don't know their salaries and so forth. So you don't know the actual cost of that marketing.
A question here on premium games: how much people are willing to pay now since they're so used to free to play, or does it matter? What do you think, Jussi?
I do think it matters. Like earlier when mobile was also started out as premium, and then there was that rush for $1 when the visibility came from how many copies you sold instead of how much money you made. So clearly the premium died out on mobile, that nowadays it doesn't make any more sense. So I haven't made any sense to make premium games there for several years, unless you have IPs like Civilization. Maybe they make still money on mobile as well, on premium. But on PC and consoles, there are, of course, lots of free-to-play games there as well. But I think the erosion hasn't been as bad there. I'm more worried personally about the Windows stores and these subscription stores where you pay €4 and then you get tons of €70 games. I'm more afraid that would erode the people's willingness to pay, because you can't make similar games. Free-to-play game and premium games are by nature different. They are different experiences. Free-to-play games need to be a hobby, like a football. You go to the training all the time, then you buy some equipment, but you could play with your regular shoes as well. But if you want to be serious, you pay licenses to play in an actual match and so forth. So it's more like a hobby. And premium games are more like a one-time experience, that like reading a book or going to the movies. So you get different experience out of it. Yes, the games, even premium games, should support replayability, particularly in our genre, the strategy games. But I don't think free-to-play as a model destroys, on PC at least, the people's willingness to pay. But the subscription or cloud-based, like Netflix of computer games, that could erode people's desire to pay. So I'm more worried about that.
This is going to be the final question. I think this is an interesting one. We didn't touch base on investors yet in PC games, but what sort of sales should you expect to pitch to investors? Do you have to promise millions from the first game? Like, is there a modest approach for steady growth? What are your thoughts, Jussi?
Well, there is this quite standard stuff which you are talking, and you're clearly the better expert here on this topic. But if investors, they know that half of their investments will fail, maybe 3 or 4 make small profit, so that one needs to make a lot of money and cover the others. So you should be able to predict at least a 10 times growth. But if you're pitching for investors, my encouragement would be to do the same as we have. We have 5 games that we're selling, and whichever publisher signs first, that will be our next game. And then we still do those estimates for each of the games. And so we can show when does the 10x come. And with the expected values that you can get from the spreadsheet, which then is the beautiful thing, it actually bases on somewhere. We can even show that with expected values you get in 4 years, you get 20x. And if any of the game would become a hit, like if we do reach that high point in there, then you could get 100x as well, or actually our highest I think is 96x in the math. But in any case, that if we do make a hit game at some stage and then sustain that, then we can provide that as well, and which with this spreadsheet. But the 10x is what the investors should be looking for.
Yeah. Thanks, Jussi. This was so great. I need to bring you back in a year to see how your projections went.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, thanks. Take care, man. Thanks to everybody
who
came to the audience. And the recording will be on Elite Game Developers later today. See ya. Bye-bye.